Trudy goes up against a serial killer who's been mutilating sex workers on today's Miami Vice. Asian Cut was directed by James A. Contner and was written by Peter McCabe from a story by Robert Ward, and it's both pretty dark and pretty good. At a sleek nightclub, while Here It Is, Take It by the Petrol Emotion plays, a young runaway named Sandee Dyson, played by Julie Brahms, who we saw a few episodes back playing Frank Hackman's doomed wife in Deliver Us from Evil, chats with an escort named Angie, who gives her the contact information for her high-paying escort service and suggests Sandee can make a lot of money that way. Then Angie takes a call and leaves, presumably to meet with a client. Outside the club, Trudy is working undercover. Vice is trying to catch a serial killer who's been preying on sex workers. A prospective customer gets too handsy with Trudy, and Crockett and Tubbs pop up to arrest the guy. While Trudy is leading the John off in handcuffs, Tubbs and Crockett are approached by a vagrant who tells them he saw a woman get murdered. They follow him into a building and find Angie dead, with Asian symbols carved on her body. At headquarters, Castillo asks Trudy to keep working the street. He tells Crockett to look into the symbols carved on the murdered women's bodies to see if there's any significance. There's a kind of confusing scene where Castillo says he doesn't know whether the symbols are Thai or Japanese or what, and it's as though the series forgot that Castillo used to work in the Golden Triangle and was married to a Thai woman, and that he lives in a Japanese-inspired home, and that he's kind of literally a samurai. The symbols ultimately turn out to be Japanese kanji, and my point is Castillo would know that. I like Season 5 of Miami Vice, but thus far it is not doing right by Castillo. Castillo visits an expert on Asian rituals, Professor Hallowell. Hallowell, who is played by David Schramm of Wings, offers to do some research into the marks carved on the murdered women. Meanwhile, Crockett is badgered for information about the case by a seedy Australian journalist, Stuart Orr Whitley, played by Russell Horton. Crockett ignores him. Tubbs and Trudy talk to Sandee Dyson's father, who is played by Steve Ryan, whom you may recognize as J. Walter Weatherman from Arrested Development. Mr. Dyson came to Miami to find his runaway daughter and wants the police to help his search. Tubbs and Trudy explain that Sandee is a legal adult and doesn't fit the criteria of a missing person, but agree to keep an eye out for her anyway. While undercover, Trudy runs into Sandee working the street. Trudy tells her her father is looking for her, but Sandee has no interest in a family reunion. She explains to Trudy that her father used to molest her. Tubbs and Switek talk to Angie's former pimp, who tells them Angie had been seeing a man named Tagoro, who has a fascination with knives. Crockett and Tubbs visit Tagoro at his studio to grill him about the murders. Tagoro is played by Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa, whom we last saw in Rising Sun of Death. All of his art seems to center around knives and bondage and sexualized violence against women, so Crockett and Tubbs go ahead and bump him up to the top of their suspect list. Shortly thereafter, Sandee turns up dead with Japanese symbols carved on her body. While searching through Sandee's belongings, Tubbs runs across her diary, which mentions joining an escort service run by a woman named Cheryl Stone. Tubbs and Gina visit Cheryl Stone, who tells them Sandee had just started working for her a few days ago. She'd only had one client, a man named Carlos, played by Alfredo Álvarez Calderón. So Gina poses as an operator at the escort service, and when Carlos calls looking for some company, she refers him to Trudy. With Tubbs and Switek shadowing her, Trudy meets with Carlos in a sequence set to the churches under the Milky Way. Carlos alarms her by pulling out a bullwhip and talking about ritual pain practices, but it turns out he just wants her to whip him. Being a trooper, Trudy does exactly that. Sandee's father bursts into a nightclub to confront Tagoro, whom he suspects of murdering his daughter. He pulls a gun, and one of Tagoro's bodyguards shoots and kills him. Tubbs and Castillo check in with Professor Hallowell. The journalist, Whitley, tries to wheedle information about the case out of Hallowell, but Tubbs sends him on his way. Carlos calls Trudy to set up another date and mentions that a friend will be joining them. Still in search of a story about the murders, Whitley breaks into Hallowell's home and snoops around. He finds Polaroids of the murdered women and realizes that Hallowell is the killer, just as Carlos and Hallowell arrive home and find him. Hallowell announces his intention to torture and kill Whitley. Crockett and Tubbs stop by Trudy's hotel room before her appointment with Carlos and discover from the manager that Carlos has already picked her up. With no way to get in contact with Trudy, the remaining Vice detectives look into Carlos's background and find he's an ex-Special Forces operative who worked with Hallowell for Air America in Laos. Tubbs and Crockett head to Hallowell's home and find Whitley's corpse. Meanwhile, Trudy is being tortured in a warehouse by Hallowell, who is dressed in a kimono and is giving a lecture on historic torture techniques to a room full of mannequins dressed in suits. Tubbs and Crockett burst in, and Tubbs chases after Carlos while Crockett frees Trudy. Crockett gives Trudy his spare gun and heads off to help Tubbs, who shoots and kills Carlos. Trudy finds Hallowell and tries to arrest him. He pulls a gun, and she shoots and kills him. The episode ends with Crockett giving Trudy a big, comforting hug. Crockett always looks like he gives really good hugs. I have a strong memory of watching this episode when it first aired, which was 3 days before my 15th birthday, and I had a friend over who had never watched any Miami Vice before, and around the time Hallowell tortures a bound and gagged Trudy by delivering electric shocks to her feet, my friend solemnly informed me that she didn't think Miami Vice was her kind of show. which is fair. But Miami Vice is very much my kind of show. I like this episode. The script is loaded with good ideas, though some of them seem like they could have used a little more polishing because it's kind of all over the place. Tagawa is a great character who gets a very flashy introduction, and then nothing much happens with him. There's the business with Sandee and her abusive father, and there's Whitley constantly popping up in scenes, and then there's the fake out with Carlos turning out to be a masochist, but wait, he's actually procuring women for a serial killer. It's nothing too egregious. These are minor complaints, but I wish the focus had been tightened because this is a very good Miami Vice episode that comes close to being a great one. It reminds me a bit of season 4's standout episode Death and the Lady in the way it examines the deeply disturbing idea of sexualized violence as art. The music choices are great. I always associate Under the Milky Way with this episode because it's used perfectly to create a very ominous mood. And Olivia Brown gives a standout performance as Trudy. Trudy is the best, and prior episodes where she's had a central role, like Missing Hours and Dutch Oven and Hell Hath No Fury, haven't quite been worthy of her awesomeness. This one is, and I'm giving it 4 flamingos. Next time Switek's gambling habit begins to interfere with his personal life and his job. Until then, I'm always around on Twitter to talk about Miami Vice, and I will see you here later.